I was 3 days out of the shell when the sky took my mother from me. It was not a cruel thing, it was just weather. A magnetic storm rolled in from the ring debris above our moon, the kind of storm that made compasses spin and pulled ships out of the sky like they were paper. My mother was flying low over the nesting cliffs when the storm caught her wing. By the time the storm passed, only one egg was left whole in the broken nest. That egg was me. A human found me. His name was Rayhan. He was a surveyor, sent to study this gray little moon before people came to build a colony here. His own ship had crashed only a few hours before he found me, and he still had a cut above his eye that had not stopped bleeding. He was hurt, tired, and far from home. But when he saw my egg glowing warm in the wreckage, he picked it up anyway and wrapped it in his blanket. He told me later that he sat with his back against a rock the whole night, holding the egg, because every time he tried to sleep, I made a small sound inside the shell and he woke up to check on me. He said it was the longest night of his life. I do not remember any of it. I only remember warmth, and a heartbeat that was not my mother's, but which I decided, in the simple way that baby dragons decide things, was good enough for me. I do not remember hatching either. What I remember first is the smell of burnt grass and metal, and a man's voice saying my name over and over, until I understood that the sound belonged to me. He called me Ember, because he said I was the exact color of a coal that has almost gone out but is still glowing underneath. He said it was not a very clever name, but it was true, and true was better than clever. He raised me on ration paste, patience, and more stubbornness than I have ever seen in one person. He built me a nest from soft foam in the corner of his small repair shelter. When I was too weak to stand, he carried me outside every morning so I could feel the sun, even though the sun on that moon was thin and pale and did not give much warmth at all. He talked to me even when I could not answer, telling me about his home, about the stars he had crossed to get here, about the family waiting for him far away. I listened to his voice long before I understood his words, and something in me held on to that voice like it was the only steady thing in a world that had already taken my mother away. Dragons grow fast. Within 1 season I was already the size of a large dog, all long neck and too much wing and clumsy feet that tripped over themselves. I broke 3 storage crates just learning to walk properly. Rayhan never got angry. He just sighed, picked up the pieces and said, "You will grow into those feet eventually." He was right, though it took longer than either of us expected. The shelter where we lived was small, built for one person, not for a person and a growing dragon. At night I curled around the heater in the corner, and Rayhan slept on a mat only a few steps away. The moon outside was cold and quiet, with gray rock and pale dust stretching out in every direction. There was only one place on the whole moon where anything green grew, a small meadow near the cliffs, warmed by underground heat vents that kept the soil soft. It was the same place where the storm had found my mother. Rayhan showed it to me once, walking slowly so I could keep up on my short legs, and told me it was the only spot on this moon with color in it. I never forgot that meadow. Something about it pulled at me, the way a warm light pulls at someone standing in the cold. As I grew, I started doing something I never really decided to start doing. Every morning, before the twin suns had climbed over the ridge, I would slip out through a gap in the shelter's vent and fly down to that meadow. There, I would search until I found one flower. Just one. The flowers there were small, blue-white, and closed tight against the morning cold, opening only once the light touched them. I would pick the flower carefully, holding it in my teeth the way I imagined I would have once held an egg, and carry it back to the shelter. I would set it gently on the crate beside Rayhan's sleeping mat, right where he would see it the moment he opened his eyes. Then I would go back to my nest and pretend to still be asleep. I never let him catch me doing it. If you had asked me why, back then, I would have said dragons do not explain themselves. But the real reason was smaller and, honestly, a little embarrassing. I did not yet have the right words for what I was feeling. There was an ache in my chest every single morning, something between gratitude and worry and love, and the only way I knew how to answer that ache was to leave something small and beautiful where he would find it. I was afraid that if he asked me why, I would discover I did not have a good enough reason, so I said nothing, and I left flowers instead. He never asked. He would simply wake, notice the flower, turn it over gently between his rough fingers, and get a certain look on his face. It was the same look he'd had the night he first held my egg, like he was doing some kind of math in his head that did not need to add up in order to matter. Life on that moon was not always gentle. The storms came often, sometimes with barely a warning, and each time one rolled in, I remembered what had happened to my mother, and my whole body went stiff with fear. Rayhan learned to read the signs of a coming storm from the way the sky changed color, and he taught me to do the same. "Watch the horizon," he would say. "When it turns copper instead of gray, we go inside." I watched. I learned. I never wanted to lose another person I loved to weather I could not control. There were other people on the moon too, eventually. A small research team arrived about a year after Rayhan found me, setting up a station not far from our shelter. They were curious about the wild dragon Rayhan had raised, and some of them were nervous around me at first. I understood their fear. I was large, and my kind were not well known to humans who had only heard old stories. But I never wanted to frighten anyone. I wanted, more than almost anything, to be trusted the way Rayhan trusted me. One of the researchers, a woman named Dr. Okafor, was especially cautious. She kept her distance for weeks, watching me from behind equipment, taking notes. Then one afternoon, a supply crate slipped from its cart and was about to crush her foot. Without thinking, I moved faster than I ever had before and caught the crate with my shoulder, pushing it aside before it could hurt her. She stared at me for a long moment afterward, breathing hard, and then she said, quietly, "Thank you, Ember." It was the first time anyone besides Rayhan had said my name with warmth in their voice. After that day, she was not afraid of me anymore. She even started leaving me small treats near her workstation, though never as thoughtful, I always told myself, as a fresh flower at sunrise. Word of the dragon who had caught a falling crate spread through the small colony. People began to smile when they saw me instead of stepping back. I began to feel, for the first time since my mother died, like I belonged somewhere. But even with new friends around, my mornings still belonged to Rayhan and to that one flower. Nothing about that ever changed. Rayhan's work on the moon grew heavier as the colony expanded. He was often asked to travel out to distant survey points, sometimes for days at a time, checking the ground for safe building sites, testing the air, mapping paths for future roads. I hated when he left. The shelter felt too quiet without his voice filling it, and the heater never seemed as warm. On those nights, I would fly to the meadow anyway, even without him there to see the flower the next morning, and I would leave it by his empty mat, waiting for his return. When he came back, tired and dusty, he always noticed the small pile of flowers that had gathered in his absence, each one a little more wilted than the last, like a row of quiet messages saying, "I waited for you. I waited for you. I waited for you." One time, he was gone for 11 days instead of the usual 2 or 3. A storm had trapped his survey team out near the far ridge, and communication with them went silent for almost a full day. I remember pacing outside the shelter until Dr. Okafor gently told me to come inside before I wore a path into the rock. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the door, listening to the wind, remembering the last storm that had taken someone I loved. When the message finally came that Rayhan's team was safe, I let out a sound so loud that half the colony heard it, something between a roar and a cry of relief. Dr. Okafor told me afterward that it did not sound like a dragon noise at all. She said it sounded exactly like a person crying with joy. When Rayhan finally walked back into the shelter, dirty and exhausted but smiling, I did not wait for morning. I flew straight to the meadow that very evening, in the fading light, and brought him a flower right then and there, pressing it into his hand before he had even taken off his boots. He looked surprised, since I had never given him one outside of the early morning before, but he did not ask questions. He just held the flower carefully, the way he always did, and said, "I missed you too, Ember." Seasons passed. I grew larger still, strong enough now to carry small loads for the colony, fast enough to outrace the local wind gusts, careful enough that even the most nervous researchers no longer flinched when I walked by. But every single morning, without fail, I still flew down to that meadow before the light came, searching through the frost for one small blue-white flower, and I still carried it back and placed it gently by Rayhan's bed. It had become as natural to me as breathing. I want to be honest and say that part of me always wondered if Rayhan knew. He was not a foolish man. He noticed everything, from the smallest crack in the shelter wall to the exact moment a storm was about to turn dangerous. It seemed unlikely that, after so many mornings, he had never guessed where the flowers came from. But he never said a word about it, and I never asked, and so the secret, if it truly was a secret at all, continued on quietly between us, morning after morning, for over 100 days. Then came the morning everything changed. I do not know exactly why I overslept that day. Perhaps the cold had finally settled deep into my bones after a long, hard winter storm the night before. Perhaps, for the first time in a long while, I had simply felt safe enough to sleep the way any tired creature deserves to sleep, without half my mind standing guard against the world. Whatever the reason, I woke to find the shelter door already open a crack, pale gray light spilling in from outside, and Rayhan's sleeping mat completely empty. My heart jumped. For one confused, half-asleep moment, I feared something was wrong, that a storm had come and taken him the way it had taken my mother. I scrambled to my feet so fast I knocked over a stack of supply crates, and I rushed outside into the cold morning air, my wings only half spread, still clumsy with sleep. I found him in the meadow. He was crouched low near the frost-covered grass, moving carefully, the way someone moves when they do not want to startle a nervous animal, or perhaps when they do not want to be caught doing something. In his rough, scarred hands, he was gently picking one small blue-white flower. He froze the moment he heard my wings beating above him. Caught, exactly the way I had always feared being caught, all those mornings, all those months. I was going to put it back before you noticed, he said, which was such a strange, backward thing to say, that for a moment I simply stared down at him, unsure whether to laugh or to feel embarrassed on his behalf. I found the very first flower almost 4 months ago, he admitted, standing up slowly, brushing frost from his knees. I did not say anything, because I did not want you to stop. But this morning, I woke up early, and I got curious. I wanted to know what it actually cost you, coming all the way down here, alone, before the light, every single day. So I came to see for myself. He held the small flower up between 2 fingers, and I noticed, with some surprise, that his hand was not quite steady. I think I understand now, he said. It is harder to say a feeling out loud than it is to just leave it somewhere quiet and walk away before anyone can ask you why. I did not have an answer ready for that. My voice, even now that I was larger and stronger, still came out rough and uneven when I was nervous, more growl than words. Why would I stop you, I finally managed, from picking a flower? Because you never let me see you do it, he said gently. Not once. I always wondered if that meant something. I did not want to ruin it by asking. I walked closer to him across the frosted grass, my long shadow falling over the small patch of blue-white flowers between us. And then I did the only honest thing that felt possible for a dragon who had just been caught with her heart out in the open. I lowered my whole head down onto his shoulder, horns and all, the way I used to when I was small enough to fit entirely inside his old flight jacket. You were the first heartbeat I ever knew, I told him quietly, after my mother's heartbeat stopped. I did not know how to thank you properly for staying awake that whole first night, holding my egg, keeping me warm when you were hurt and tired yourself. Words never felt like enough, so I started saying thank you with flowers instead, one morning at a time, hoping that somehow, over time, it would add up to something worth saying. Rayhan was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the wind moving softly through the grass, and somewhere far off, the low hum of the colony waking up for the day. Then he laughed, a rough, warm sound with something wet underneath it, and he wrapped his arm around my neck the way he used to when I weighed only a few pounds, and not several hundred. Well, he said, his voice thick, I suppose it is my turn now then. He did not give me that particular flower. Instead, he pressed it carefully between the pages of the worn logbook he always carried in his jacket, right beside notes about wind patterns and soil samples. He told me, years later, that he marked the page with the exact date, because it was the day a half-grown dragon finally stopped hiding and let him witness her kindness with his own eyes, instead of only ever finding the proof of it left quietly behind. From that morning on, things between us were different, though not in any way I could easily explain to someone who had not lived it. We did not suddenly talk about feelings all the time, the way I imagine some humans might expect a story like this to go. We were still quiet, still simple with each other, still more comfortable with small actions than with long speeches. But something had shifted. Some wall between us had come down gently, without breaking anything on either side. I kept bringing him a flower every single morning after that day, exactly as before. The only difference was that now he knew, and I let him know that I knew he knew, and somehow that small shared secret became even more precious than the hidden one had ever been. Some mornings, if I woke early enough, I would find him already sitting quietly by the meadow's edge, not picking a flower himself, just waiting there in the cold, watching the sunrise touch the frost, giving me the space to do what I had always done, while also, in his own quiet way, sharing it with me. The colony grew larger over the following years. More families arrived, more buildings rose from the gray dust, and the small meadow near the cliffs slowly became something of a local landmark, a place colony children were brought to see the Dragon's Garden, as they came to call it. I did not mind sharing it. If anything, I liked watching small human children crouch down carefully in the frost, learning to be gentle with something small and living, the same way I had once learned gentleness from watching Rayhan. Dr. Okafor eventually became the head of the colony's research station, and she often told newcomers the story of the crate I had caught, though she always added, with a small smile, that the real proof of my character was something much quieter than that, something she had only heard about secondhand, involving flowers and mornings and a great deal of patience. Rehan grew older too, of course, the way humans do. His hair turned gray at the edges, and the cut above his eye from that very first night healed into a thin, pale scar that never fully disappeared. He worked less out in the field as the years passed, spending more time training newer surveyors, passing along everything the moon had taught him. But no matter how busy his days became, no matter how important his work grew within the colony, he never once slept through a morning without finding a small blue-white flower waiting quietly beside his bed. I asked him once, many years later, sitting together at the edge of the meadow as the twin suns rose slowly over the ridge, whether he had ever grown tired of the flowers, whether after so many mornings it had started to feel like an old habit instead of something meaningful. He thought about the question for a long moment before answering, the way he always did when something mattered to him. Every morning, he finally said, "For as long as I can remember, the very first thing my eyes see when I wake up is proof that someone loves me enough to think of me before the sun even rises. I do not think a person can ever grow tired of that ember." I think that might be one of the few things in this universe that only gets more precious with time, not less. I did not have a clever answer for that, so I simply rested my head against his shoulder again, the way I had that very first morning he caught me, and we sat together quietly, watching the light spread slowly across the meadow, turning the frost to gold. Looking back now, after so many years, I understand something I did not fully understand as a young, frightened dragon carrying flowers in the dark before sunrise. It was never really about the flowers themselves. It was about choosing, every single morning, no matter how tired or busy or uncertain I felt, to show up quietly for someone who had once shown up for me, without hesitation, on the very worst night of my life. The flower was simply the shape that choice happened to take. I still bring him one every morning, even now. He still lets me keep that small part of the ritual a little bit mysterious, never watching too closely, never asking exactly which flower I chose or why. Some things, I have learned, do not need to stop being quiet in order to stop being lonely. Some rituals grow stronger not by being explained but simply by being repeated, morning after morning, for as long as two hearts are willing to keep choosing each other. And so, on this moon far from anywhere either of us first called home, in a meadow warmed by heat rising up from deep underground, a dragon and the human who once held her egg through the coldest night of both their lives continue a small, simple tradition that began, quite by accident, with a single flower left beside a sleeping man's bed. It has been the truest thing I have ever said, in a language older than words.